And hello everyone and welcome. My name is Sue Hutley. I'm the convener of the Workforce and Organisational Development Working Party of QULOC, and welcome to our first Professional Development Report Back webinar for 2019. For wherever you are, and on behalf of QULOC, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which we meet virtually today and acknowledge our elders past, present and emerging. So whatever Indigenous country you're coming from today, please take a moment of acknowledgement. So today we have 3 speakers. Now we have had some technical difficulties late in the day today, so we're going to just change the order of our speakers today. So we do apologise for the late notice, but in order of the speakers today, we are actually going to start with Stacey Larner from USQ. We're going to have Stacey speak and then have 5 minutes for questions. We'll then move on to Julie Cartwright from CDU, again 20 minutes and then 5 minutes for questions. And lastly today it will be Steele from QUT. So that's the order of our speakers today. This webinar is being recorded. You can chat to us on the chat function. You can also Q&A on the Q&A function of Zoom. If you've got any questions while the speakers are on, please use those functions. So everyone, welcome. And I'm going to ask Adam, our lovely Executive Officer of QULOC, and this is also Adam's first webinar, so thanks so much for Adam for organising everything and for his first time as well. Welcome, Adam. So I'd like to hand over to Stacey Larner from USQ, who's going to tell us about her experience at ALIA Information Online 2019. Thanks, Stacey.
Thanks, Sue. Okay, I'll just share my screen. All right, I'm hoping everybody can see that. Okay. So this is my report back from the ALIA Information Online Conference 2019. So this was in Sydney and it was the second week of February. So I was actually successful in being accepted to do a full conference presentation, and this was actually my first ever conference presentation. So I was pretty excited to be attending and presenting at my first library conference. I only graduated at the end of 2017, so yes, it was a very exciting thing to be doing. Okay, so I'm just going to give a little bit of a background to my conference presentation because my PD activity was that presentation as well as the wider conference. So in my previous role, I was originally the Senior Library Officer Digital Services. I was asked by our Library Director, Carmel O'Sullivan, to investigate if there was a need for USQ Library to have its own social media accounts because we still don't have any social media accounts, and rather than just jumping in and creating some accounts, Carmel thought it would be a good idea to see if there was any evidence, to see what other people, what other Australian academic libraries were doing, and that was my task, was to do an environmental scan, a literature review, and just a little project on that. So a bit of an overachiever. So I did the environmental scan, started reading the literature, but I also wanted to do some original research because I did see a gap. The concept was kind of twofold. I can't see the chat, by the way, so I'm just going to keep going. There was going to be a Twitter analysis, which would look at actual behaviours on Twitter of Australian academic libraries, and a survey to gain some insights into the intended behaviours and staff perception of social media accounts, and that was focusing specifically on Australian academic libraries. So I did the survey last year in October, And that was asking academic library social media managers and also staff who contribute to those social media accounts, how they use social media and how they assess the success of their accounts. The second part, which is the Twitter analysis, is underway now. I had some technical difficulties as I spoke about in my conference presentation. We had some technical fails, so I had to enlist the help of one of our IT experts. So that is now underway. So about the presentation. So I was really fortunate to be presenting on the first day of the conference. Highly recommend it if you can manage to swing it. I presented at 2:30 in the afternoon, and it was great because it gave me enough time to get organised, visit the speaker room and update my slides, but also once I got that out of the way, I just relaxed and enjoyed the rest of the conference. So days 2 and 3, yeah, were great. So my chair was Philippa Stevens of the State Library New South Wales, and she was lovely, as was Deb Nolan of the University of Wollongong. She actually presented after me, so we were session buddies. And I told them both that it was my first ever conference presentation. I told anybody that it was my first conference presentation, and so everybody was really supportive. In the presentation, I reported on the results of the environmental scan, the literature review, and the survey. So I probably spent the most time on the survey results with lots of graphs. And if there's time at the end, I can run through some of those if necessary. I didn't time this, sorry, so we might finish early, I'm not sure. So one thing I mean, I knew this was going to happen. I knew there'd be Twitter conversations during the presentation because that's what we do at conferences. People tend to tweet what they're seeing. But I just wasn't quite expecting how overwhelming that would be to finish the presentation and look at my Twitter account and just see my mentions had exploded. And I didn't really have time during the conference to participate in those conversations, which was a little bit frustrating. It would have been nice to do that, but because I was at the conference to also learn and attend presentations, I couldn't quite engage with those conversations. And I was pretty surprised because I did take a critical stance. It wasn't anti-social media, but I did have some criticisms. And I was expecting some pushback, but it was interesting to me that this did seem to resonate with a lot of commentators. There might have been conversations going on where people didn't mention me and they were more critical, but I haven't seen anything that's specifically critical of what I said. And these are some of the tweets that people mentioned me in. So this was the slide that I think people got the most enjoyment out of. Memes were always good. And this was right at the start of my presentation where I wanted to explain why I hadn't quite done the Twitter analysis yet because, yeah, practitioner research is very hard because we're trying to do our jobs and also do research at the same time. And it's very easy to push that research to the side. And, you know, we had a system launch and that took priority. And then I changed jobs. I got this liaison librarian job. So this was no longer actually part of my role, but I had to keep doing it. And then, as I said, I had some problems with the technology for the Twitter capture. So this was one of the tweets that captured my literature review slides. And in it, Nicole says, students are more likely to follow the institutional accounts, which is what I said. This is a concept that seemed to resonate with a lot of people. I was talking about institutional isomorphism, and Maria's summarized that as library see, library do. So I was basically talking about the professional bandwagon effect of libraries just copying what other libraries are doing without really considering whether that's right in their library context. So this was my slide on defining success. And Kate was being very supportive on Twitter. And this last one, just about the least successful platforms for university libraries. So yeah, so I'm just going to reflect on the presentation. As I said, it's my first conference presentation, so I did want to think a little bit about what worked and what didn't work. So this was the big one for me. I practiced it many, many times, and I timed it every single time, and every time I did it, I came in under time. So in the actual conference, I kind of relaxed and expanded on a few things a little bit, and then I got the bell and I went, I haven't finished yet. So I did rush the last part, and I did miss a couple of bits of information that I wanted to share. So in hindsight, I do regret rushing the end of that because we still had plenty of time for questions. And in fact, we had more time for questions than I saw some other presenters. So I think that if I knew that the end was in sight, I would just calmly keep going and not rush that. One of the beautiful things about being on social media, though, is that I did get to say that I would tweet additional information. So one of the questions I tried to answer, and then I said, I will actually tweet the details of this reference so that people can follow it up. And also tweeted the conference paper link when it became available too. So anyone who was interested could follow me and get updates that way. And as I said here, this worked well, and I'm still receiving mentions and retweets on Twitter about the conference. And yes, it was an incredible experience. So thank you to QULOC for the scholarship, and USQ Library for supporting my attendance. And also thank you to the Information Online Committee for seeing merit in my presentation proposal. It was an excellent opportunity. Okay, so my key professional takeaways. So I was really inspired by the presenters. There were some very passionate people who were presenting, and there was a lot of evidence of how our library and information professionals are making a difference in the profession. So I went through all of my notes for all of these presentations I went to, and there were two main themes that kind of stuck with me. Actually, I think I can check the chat. Yeah, okay. The first was the growing use of design thinking and user experience feedback. So this was particularly evident in the presentations. Matt Pascoe, who was from Ipswich Libraries, public libraries. So his presentation was called Netflix, but with books, and might talk just briefly about that. So it was basically a collection promotion project called the Marketplace. And the idea is to connect more of the community with more of the collection. And the idea behind it was that users didn't need to know what they were looking for. They would actually be able to stumble across something. So unlike an OPAC, it's a more intuitive experience. And they decided to get rid of library jargon and use terms like click and collect rather than you can collect your hold. They had a funny one, it was 60 minutes or it's free, like I think it's Domino's, and then they said, oh, but it's free anyway. So that's evidence that they were thinking about what their users might want. The DX Labs New South Wales installation, I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I want a photo booth in our library because I just think it's such a great idea. So their idea was that they wanted to show the face of New South Wales. And so they were encouraging people's participation through photo booths in the library space. And people could tweet themselves, a selfie of themselves to the Instagram account. And it was just really inspiring their use of digital tools. So using Instagram and the photo booth, and then like a WordPress backend to moderate their queue, because they did actually moderate the Instagram queue, because sometimes people send in inappropriate things. But with the photo booth, it was instant. So people could actually see themselves come up on the screen in the library. and they had a lot of testing and user feedback. I've got a picture up there. We're interested in your feedback, and they had user testing with that. And Deb Nolan of the University of Wollongong. So her presentation was about a chatbot that they designed and created to solve client service challenges. The idea was that they had a significant proportion of their queries coming in out of hours, and so they wanted to create a chatbot who could answer simple queries and refer on, like send an email to a librarian expert or whatever, if it couldn't answer that question. And so her presentation was all about the design thinking in that, and the challenges that they experienced as well, because it was a very specific skill set that they needed, and they didn't have that on staff in the library, so they did rely on students for that as well. I think they were doing a master's project. Sadly, their chatbot is not working yet. It's not up and running because they just encountered too many difficulties. But that paper is actually available on the ALIA online website. So I encourage you to go have a read, because I was really inspired by Deb's talk. Move on. Okay. So my second takeaway was that I saw evidence that there's growing awareness of the need to mitigate inequalities entrenched in an increasingly digital world. So institutional support for disruption to default ways of thinking. And I actually had two that I condensed into this. Was thinking about ethics and humanism, and recognition that because we're using these digital tools, there are some difficulties that we're encountering in our profession. So, for example, I've got down the bottom Genevieve Bell's presentation, Wonder in the Age of AI. Now, that was a keynote, so you can watch it. And she was talking about how conversations about artificial intelligence and humans need to move beyond ethics and talk about concepts such as curiosity, wonder, surprise. So she said, how do we create algorithms for discovery and or discomfort, not just familiarity and comfort? So the idea that Netflix will keep giving you the same recommendations based on what you've already watched. So you're going to be watching more of the same. Or Spotify tells you, you listen to this, so you might like this. So she's saying, where's the discovery? Where's the surprise? And I really liked that idea because, you know, we can get really comfortable, and if we have algorithms that are exposing us to new things, that actually might be a really good thing. And she also talked about how inequities are reproduced and reproduced without critique, especially when we're looking at algorithms. So Danielle Fromek and Sophie Herbert were talking about empowering Indigenous perspectives through the humble referencing system. I think Julie's going to be talking about this one more in depth, so I will leave that to her, but I found that really inspiring. Rachel Franks of the State Library, New South Wales. Challenging the canon, so collaboration, digitisation and education. So she was asking, why do we digitise what we digitise? What do we prioritise? She also talks about the need to make ourselves uncomfortable. Peter Lennon's talk blew me away. It was absolutely amazing. They were talking about their, he's from the Yale Digital Humanities Lab, and they were talking about their neural networks, and they ran 4 experiments. I'm just checking on my notes here. So basically, he said, get your phone out and open up your Photos app and search for cats. And so, you know, you'll find all your cats in there. Or if you're like me and you don't have any pictures of cats, you are a bad person and need to leave the room. So he was talking about the problem when algorithms start to put labels on images, and how these labels are designed for the modern world and for consumerism, basically. So if you're applying them to historical images, there's going to be some problems. there was an example of like slave chains that the algorithm identified as necklaces or jewelry. So they wanted to design a neural network that wouldn't label it. It would just group images together because they were visually similar. And the bottom right image there is their neural neighbors network that took a big collection of images and then grouped them together based on visual similarities, but didn't apply that last layer, so they're not actually labeled. And so they didn't want to include things like race, gender, there were some other categories as well, just to avoid some of those stereotypes. So that was incredibly interesting. There were a lot more experiments as well, but I'm not sure if I will have time to talk about all of those. They did have one about neural networks trying to create images of people based on being fed a whole bunch of images of people. And some of them were horrific. They were like, the neural network was hallucinating. And so there were people with 3 eyes, and there was a detective network who was supposed to, it was supposed to pick the fakes. So it was trying to figure out which of the images were real and which were fakes. And so they were learning off each other. So that was really interesting as well. The main thing with Peter Leonard's talk that was relevant to this particular takeaway was that he was talking about the need to consider the ethical implications of labeling of images and basically say, what are you prepared to work on and what goes against your ethical framework. So I'll move on from that one. So my key personal takeaways are a bit of a mix here. So the first one was that all of the passion, innovation, critical thinking, and kindness on display did reinforce to me how much I'm happy to be part of this profession. And I tweeted about it from the conference to say, you know, I'm very happy to call these people my peers because it was an amazing conference. I had an absolutely fantastic time and everybody was so welcoming and supportive and kind, and it did kind of re-inspire me. And I even blogged about it too. Another one was to network widely. So I was really lucky. I was at the conference with 2 other people from my team, my manager, Catherine Hay, and our Makerspace coordinator, Steph Piper. Steph is an amazing networker and I learnt a lot from being with her. She will talk to anybody pretty much because she just wants to talk about 3D printing all the time. But because of that, she will introduce herself to anybody. And one of the things I discovered was that it doesn't matter who you're talking to. Some of the most interesting conversations I had were with people who were not from academic library contexts. And I think we can all learn from each other. As someone who I can be a little bit of an introvert, so sometimes it's hard to put myself out there and do these things, but it was well worth it. This was really, really, really valuable. As said, introvert, sometimes having that connection with people on social media is a bit of an icebreaker. And especially after my presentation, I had a lot more people follow me and I was able to connect with people through social media while I was at the conference. So that was really useful. This is a big one. So there were a few things that I said yes to that completely terrified me, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But also give yourself permission to recharge. And if you have to, you can say no to those opportunities as well. So there was one night that I was going to go out and network with people, and I just couldn't because we'd done a massive tour of the University of New South Wales makerspaces, which I'll talk more about. Okay. So the first thing that I got to do that was extra, I'll just check the time, was the IOTV. James Nicholson of ALIA Queensland invited me to participate in this, and it was completely terrifying. When I got his message, I was like, no, and I actually replied to him, sure, why not? Even though it was like really terrifying. And I have to admit, I still haven't watched the videos, and I'm probably not going to, but I think a lot of people have. So I was invited to ALIA, which is the Librarians as Researchers Collective, and that was as a result of my presentation and mentioning practitioner research. And the UNSW Makespaces visit with Steph Piper, which we kind of did separately, but that was incredibly amazing, and Steph's eyes kind of grew very wide. And yeah, that was good as well. I think I'm getting short on time here.
Couple of minutes.
Couple of minutes, okay. So the application of my work obviously goes a lot more beyond just concrete kind of things. I just found that it was really mind expanding and really challenged me to keep 3 questions in the front of my mind. The first is, how can I make a difference? If I'm in a meeting with somebody, I want to think about how I can actually help them and make a difference in this context. Is it default thinking or design thinking? And it's really easy in our day-to-day work to just go back to our old habits and, you know, be a bit discouraged or whatever. But I really want to move beyond that and incorporate design thinking into my approach day-to-day. And what do our clients need, and are we asking them or just assuming we know best? And I think that's something that it's a trap we can all fall into. In my library, obviously I did the presentation, the research from that project will influence USQ Library's social media strategy, but concrete actions from the conference, I'd really like us to include Indigenous materials in our Harvard referencing guide, the way UTS has, and Kathleen Smeaton's presentation. So, but you're a digital native, can't you already do that? Which was a great presentation. That could actually help us with our own digital literacy initiatives. And for QULOC, I think Terry Janke's keynote presentation was probably the standout for me. She was talking about Indigenous cultural and intellectual property. And I think that engaging with her TrueTrack's IP protocols would be very valuable thing for us to be doing in QULOC. And the standout presentation. So I've already spoken about most of these, actually all of these. So I'll end with the Best Slide Award from Dan from ProQuest, who was talking about data privacy. And I loved this slide because it's great. So, okay.
Thanks, Stacey. We've got a couple of minutes for questions. Now, for our participants, if you hover down over the bottom of your screen, you've got a Q&A. But also, if we can see you waving, not really. So I can't see any questions. I'll get my trusty assistant, Adam, to see if he can see any questions. And we do have a chat though, so thank you, James, for letting us know that Stacey has already got 120. And so please do have a look at IOTV, Stacey and others. I think that's a really good tip on the chat there today. So as we don't have any Q&A, I'm going to thank Stacey very much. You can connect with Stacey via social media, Google her.
Twitter.
And
not sure if my Twitter comes up on Google, but
also be on the QULOC website. So well done, Stacey, and thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
So we're going to move on to our next speaker today, which is actually going to be Julie Cartwright from CDU. Julie, I just wanted to let you know that your time today is 1:30 to 1:50. So we're just on changing up our speakers and times today. So Julie is from Charles Darwin University. She was also lucky enough to attend the ALIA Information Online 2019. Now, I think Julie does not necessarily have video today, so we're going to pop Julie's slides up. And Julie, over to you. And I think if you need any assistance, let us know.
Okay, thank you, Sue. I hope you can hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, great. Okay, thank you. As the same as Stacey, I attended the ALIA Information Online conference, and I had an absolute ball. It was fantastic. I've only been to one conference before, so this was a real treat for me. Okay, try and get to the next slide. Sorry, I'm having trouble moving along. Here we go. Okay, so as Stacey said, it was at the Hilton Hotel, 11th to the 15th of Feb. The theme was infinite possibilities, and wow, there was a lot of papers that reflected that. There were 10 keynote speakers, 80 plus speakers, 80 plus exhibitors, 6 pre-conference workshops, and 100 plus delegates. So a quick overview. As I said, it was my first attendance at an ALIA Information Online conference, and I'd like to take the opportunity to thank QULOC for providing the scholarship that allowed me to go, and also CDU Library for supporting my attendance. The pre-conference workshops were a valuable experience in terms of both getting knowledge or gaining knowledge, and provided a really nice introduction to colleagues from around the country. Indeed, the people I met on day one during the workshops are the ones that I met up with later on in the week and really created a really nice friendship with. The week was really, really busy. It progressed at a pace, and the keynotes and concurrent session speakers were all really inspiring and thought-provoking. I had the opportunity also to catch up with some old colleagues, which was great, and meeting new ones was a pleasure, and one of the major takeaways for me personally and professionally. So some key professional takeaways. Carla Hayden's presentation really resonated with me, and it was for me a rediscovery of what libraries mean to society. Libraries are universal equalisers and the bedrock of a civil democratic society. Libraries encourage diversity and inclusion and the other voices. So Carla said that she was very pleased to see the welcome to country that prefaced every presentation, and she said that respect for other cultures during our conference was very evident. She said the Library of Congress want to open and expose people to the world, and generally libraries do that as well. The Library of Congress collects in 100 languages, and half their collection is in languages other than English. So she also believes that libraries help to create global citizens. She was also talking about libraries in their communities, how they provide support and a safe space physically and intellectually for all comers. Anyone is available, anyone is able to walk into a library and get that support and feel that safe space. Libraries also provide services tailored to their community. So whether it's a mobile bus for a rural area, she was talking about her experience in Africa at the time, and we all know about rural mobile library buses in Australia as well. And she was also talking about how the New York Library loans out neckties, handbags, briefcases, etc. for job interviews. So the library is able to respond to the needs of the community that they're in. Libraries are authoritative, trusted and objective source of information and resources. Someone asked her a question about the political situation in the States at the time when there was an embargo on some, I think a Donald Trump embargo on something about the building the wall. She was very gracious and said that the library needs to be neutral, but also it needs to present as many points of view as possible so people can decide for themselves on issues specifically like that. She also said that the library, and this made me think as well, it is an institution that only gives. So she did observe that where else can you enter into an institution and be greeted with how can I help you, what do you need? And it's all for free. No money is asked for, no money exchanges hands. So I thought that was a really lovely way to end that section. Okay, so the next professional takeaway was my realisation of how big the glamour sector is. it's a very dynamic and diverse area of cultural and community life. The diversity of thought and presentations illustrated that across all institutions, the goal is the same, and that's to enhance access and engagement with cultural resources and objects for the communities they serve. So the presentations I went to that actually illustrate this is I went to the 5 Senses of Glamour, which was a real feast for the senses. The University of Wollongong have created a chatbot for after-hours students using their knowledge base to answer those questions. And they used a combination of Agile, Scrum and Design Thinking methodology to create that chatbot, something that we can actually think about in our own library. The State Library of Queensland, Unstacked, was a real-time browsing experience, and it was created by users of the State Library, which actually was other users were able to see on the website what their counterparts were browsing as well. And it was put up on a big screen in their foyer. So very interactive and an engaging way to present parts of the collection to the public. So, and the last point I've got there, actually I also wanted to mention, as Stacey did, Peter Leonard from the Yale University, the Digital Humanities Research. He was talking about when archives become data sets, and we all know we all have archives, and now they're talking a lot about data sets and how do we actually mine those data sets, and he was talking about using AI to mine those data sets. So thinking about how all the new tools available to us are able to be applied to older sets of information. Also, that last point there, the important role of libraries and the sector as depositories of knowledge to caretake, preserve and provide access to Indigenous cultural heritage, and recognising, engendering respect for First Nations languages and culture in a digital world. So I'll also mention Terry Janke's ISIP, for Indigenous Cultural Intellectually Property protocols, the True Tracks protocols. And indeed, several of the presentations on the 3rd day of the conference acknowledged the importance of libraries as repositories of Indigenous cultural materials. So they were 3 of my professional takeaways. Some of the personal takeaways was learning a couple of new words, which I've never heard before. Some of you may have. Intertwingled was mentioned during Mike Jones's presentation, Relationality and the Unrealised Potential of Digital Collections. He was talking about one of the original internet computer boffins, Ted Nelson, who actually coined this phrase. And Ted Nelson was talking about the interconnectedness and things and how everything could be enmeshed together. And Ted Nelson helped to develop hypertext. So he was talking about how we can create visible pathways and connections from a navigation perspective through resources and information that is digitised. The term insensoriality also was a new one for me, and it was actually used during the 5 Senses of Glamour presentation, and Deb Verhoeven used it to explain the experience that we were just about to have, and it was absolutely a very apt word because it was an intersensorial experience for sure. It was actually coined in 2006 in the UK. The 5 Senses of Glamour was a set of 5 Petra Kucha speakers, pairing technology with sensory themes, the sensory themes such as taste, touch, sight, hearing and smell. And a couple of examples of that were on the right-hand side, you can see a painting with some metadata on its left. So it was music made from paintings, and the metadata of the actual painting was collected, and there was light and shade scanning, and they were both put into a program and created music from each painting, which was fascinating. Another one that actually really interested me was the presentation by David Woodbridge. He's a blind or sight impaired person, and he was talking about assistive technology for sight impaired people. They have the same aspirations and expectations about going to museums, art galleries, libraries, and the technology enables them to use their smartphone to dial a service, and then the person on the other end actually describes what they're seeing. And on the day he actually dialed his service and we could all hear the person on the other end. He was describing the room we were in and how many people were there and so forth. And I thought that is a great service to be available. And David was actually arguing that if it could be rolled out in institutions where vision impaired people like to go for free, because he actually pays for his service every month. So another thing I wasn't actually aware of, and that really interested me in terms of giving me a bit of perspective on, I'm not sight impaired myself, so it gave me a bit of perspective on what that experience might be like. Okay, so the depth and breadth of research and innovative visionary thinking was one of my key personal takeaways. This will enable communities to experience the digital future in ways that are egalitarian, insightful and meaningful. So some of the themes that I picked up on were creating new ways to connect with old data. So there was a lot of information about existing historical collections and exploiting them with new technologies and making them more accessible and creating new ways for patrons to interact with them. And also discovering tools that assist in looking at data to extract different kinds of meaning for multiple purposes. So there were infinite possibilities indeed. And the last point there, the importance of acknowledging what went before in relation to Indigenous collections and promoting sensitivity and respect for the Indigenous treasures in our libraries. So we did actually, during the conference, several people talked about our colonial past, and we do have colonial legacy records sitting in our archives and libraries. And these records are often insensitive to Indigenous people's cultural connections. And there's lots of copyright issues as well with ethnographical materials. So I think the ISIP protocols I mentioned a little bit earlier could probably go a long way to maybe redressing some of those issues in existing collections. Okay, so this resonated with me because this is a presentation by Daniel Hook. I'm an academic librarian, liaison librarian, and I teach reliance on scholarly research to both undergraduates and postgraduate students. So I was very interested in what Daniel had to say about the future of the scholarly communication, the possible demise of the journal article, shock horror. The publication and its potential data trail, I know it's very small, but I hope you can sort of see all the interconnections there and the publication in red in the centre. The publication and its potential data trail can become disconnected when the narrative article is published. So access to the rich data background is not seamless or easily discoverable. So Daniel's presentation was called Reproduced, Atomised and Deconstructed, the Future of Scholarly Communication. So he talks about creating a data object instead of a narrative, which is the journal article. The research article has been the standard method of research output for about 350 years. So he argued that research is now data rich, highly collaborative, iterative and fast paced. And it's difficult in its current form to discover all the work, which is the data analysis, that created the output or the journal article. Data is often more valuable than the narrative, and the goal is collaborating, sharing open data to create a research object that is not static, but updatable and reversioned as more insights are gained. So instead, a layered approach would create connections and linkages to the data objects that create the final narrative. Creating a multi-layered resource using tools such as Overleave, which is the very bottom right image, which is a collaborative project and data management tool. Catalysis, blockchain engagement between parties, which eliminates commercial providers, which we all like. And the research data management tool Figshare, which is data storage and combines open data sets, which is shareable and discoverable. So In other words, a research object that is made up of layers that are updated with new data, thus creating a shareable, versioned narrative research object. Daniel does note, though, that because the method of research output has been the journal article for 350 years, it's going to be very hard to move people from thinking that that is the be-all and end-all, and thinking about creating objects instead of just narratives or journal articles. So I found that really interesting. Okay, so again, Stacey and I both found this very interesting. This is Kathleen Smeaton's presentation. Probably because we're actually at CDU Library, we're actually creating our own digital capability framework at this as we speak. So this really spoke to what we're doing here. So we know that digital literacy is currently a buzzword, and particularly in academic libraries, ensuring that students achieve digital literacy is now seen as an important part of graduate outcomes, as in my university as well. So I was interested in UQ's journey in creating their own digital literacy resource for students and staff. So a survey of students was rolled out in 2018, and it garnered 9,000 responses, which is incredible. A real mandate to work from. Identified gaps emerged where knowledge was assumed and student experience suffered. So understanding this has allowed UQ to create a suite of modules that can be embedded in content. So the presentation that Kathleen showed us illustrates what's possible in addressing digital literacy and identifies the gaps. And she was working from an existing institutional information literacy, digital literacy framework. In a practical sense, it's not knowing how to use the tools available can affect students' academic success. So examples are using online classrooms, and I know I've had issues myself with students unable to log into online classes, difficulties with technology and so forth, and also assuming all students know how to communicate and collaborate online in an appropriate way using email and various other tools. And also choosing the right tool for the job, for example, Google Docs or Microsoft Word, and also choosing the right analysis tools for data. Out of the survey, they found that 65% of students agreed that digital technologies make learning more enjoyable. 70% agreed that digital skills are important in your chosen or in their chosen career, and 40% said they didn't have time to update their digital skills, which is understandable, I guess. So the takeaways for me from this presentation were work with your students. So you find out what they want, you survey them, which is what UQ has done. You create it with them. So you ask them what they need and how they would like to receive it. You put it somewhere they're going to find it, and do it quickly to, I guess, ensure the momentum stays in place. Don't assume just because it's there for these, you can see the modules sitting here. Don't assume just because the modules are sitting there on a web page that students are going to use it, which is where it needs to be embedded. So you really need to get staff, academic staff on board. And they've created it in a modular way, so lecturers can pick and choose which modules are going to be most suitable for their students at particular times. And it's all open source and all Creative Commons licensed. So it's great, and I think it's going to really assist us here at CDU, or be informed by what UQ has already produced. So we're going forward with our project this year. Okay, so the last presentation that really spoke to me was the Empowering Indigenous Perspectives through the Humble Referencing System by Daniel Hromek and Sophie Herbert. I'm the Indigenous Futures Librarian at CDU, and I sit on QULOC's Indigenous Strategy Reference Group with Stacey, actually. And 2019 is the year of Indigenous languages, so it gets you thinking about how libraries and institutions can make collection description more meaningful for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous users. So CDU's major pillars, one of CDU's major pillars is Indigenous leadership. And a small part of this process could be recognising Indigenous perspectives and thinking about how Indigenous materials can be described in a more humanised way, in terms respectful of their provenance. It's a very simple idea, but can be powerful for an institution to implement the idea in policy and create a sensibility around Indigenous content and identity. It enables the institution and its students to assimilate a necessary awareness of how Indigenous people relate to country. So the idea recognises country and tries to redress colonial processes, creating connections back to where the material was created. Both tangible and intangible cultural artefacts can be recorded in this way. So placing the object or material in time and place and using the word unrecorded instead of unknown serves to place the object in time and space and denote some aspect of belonging to place and people. Our CDU collection development policy is currently being revised, and I hope to be able to contribute in terms of looking at how we can include the ISIP principles and ATSI-Learn protocols in the final document, and indeed our own humble Harvard referencing system. I think we're going to need a meeting so we can incorporate some of these Indigenous respect ideas into our own humble Harvard referencing system. And lastly, I went on the very last day, I went to the Green Square Library in Zetland with met a group of other librarians there and had a very lovely day looking around this incredible, very new library, which is actually underground. And design principles just blew me away. It was just incredible. And the people who live in Zetland are very, very lucky to have such a lovely library. And that's really the end of my presentation. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. I'm just going to check on the chat and Q&A. I can't see any chats, but for those of you who are with us today, if you'd like to pop a question up on those. No? Right. Well, Julie, thank you so much. I'm really pleased that you had a great experience. And we really thank you for your presentation today. And again, for those of you who are participating today or attending today, or perhaps watching on the webinar, you can also contact Julie with any questions that you may have. Thank you, Julie. So everyone, we're going to move on to our last speaker today, and that's Greg Steele from QUT, who was lucky enough to attend the International Digital Curation Conference this year. Greg, really great to be able to attend an international conference, I'm sure. I'm going to hand over to you now. Again, we've got 20 minutes with you and then some opportunities for questions at the end. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you. I've got to get my, I've got to get my PowerPoint up. Okay. Yes. Yep. And there.
We can see you and we can hear you.
Okay, good, excellent. Full screen. Just a moment. I'm just going to get full screen. There. Sorry. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Greg Steele. Just went to sorry. Okay. Right. I'm a repository resource librarian here at QUT, Library Resource Services, and a part of my role is working with the QMW, which is our media warehouse. We have the digital assets management system. I'd like to say thank you to QULOC for the professional development scholarship, and my library resource team leader and manager for supporting, and the library director for approving this conference. And special thanks to Jill Rogers, who's service manager for digital collections, as a mentor and for the endeavour of going to the conference. So the benefits of going to the conference, as I noticed at front, was the first time I've been to a conference. It was an opportunity to present a poster, which we had a minute to present. And there was, I strongly believe in data visualization, which was the purpose of the presentation. And attending the conference afforded the opportunity to share ideas and knowledge for the QUT staff and the network of curated professionals. So, and there was an opportunity to grow and support the QUT Digital Collections. So where the idea started was an idea called Off the Grid here at QUT. We have a staff innovation for development since 2015. Staff are offered the opportunity to have 30 staff hours over a period of 5 months to investigate and develop ideas that might support the library, and at the end of that time to produce a poster to share with the library staff. So I've had experience with this once before. In 2016, my colleague and myself, we produced a three GIF animations to based on the material within the digital collections, and those GIF animations were they were entered into an international competition, which we won an international prize. So, so more about the QUT Digital Collections. The collections house materials in a digital form that are cultural and heritage materials. We have 15 collections at the moment, and the collections are either born digital or they can be digitized. For instance, we have a collection which is historic glass plates that have been scanned. So this was the focus of entering the off-the-grid poster off-the-grid competition. Well, it's not so much a competition, but off-the-grid last year produced a poster. Jill Rogers and myself, we wanted to create a poster to show the structure and content of the digital collections. And we started with the traditional way of putting just a static view of the collections together, and then decided that there was an opportunity here to use data visualization. So I was able to create a program, and was able to import a spreadsheet, a CSV data spreadsheet. So it would create an interactive hierarchy tree that could be updated if the input information changed. Then it could reflect a new collection. So in the following this, we submitted the poster into the international conference. So the Data Curation Centre, where the submission was made, they accepted that poster. So, and Jill Rogers, who's the service manager for the collection, was going to that conference to deliver a lightning talk. So when we got to Melbourne, our time was divided between a site visit to Monash University, which is the first day, and then subsequently the 2 following days were at the conference at Melbourne University. So here's day 1. We visited Clayton campus, and we had arranged with colleagues there that was able to discuss their best practice and compare notes, essentially, for the use of the TALIS system, which is part of the work that I do here in the library, and also to go on and talk to another colleague there about their use of digital repository, and particularly looking at Panapto and Equala. Here at QUT, we're using Media Warehouse, which is sort of at end of life, and there was an opportunity to create a report that could inform future possibilities. And as you can see, I've just laid out there, we had opportunity to talk about a number of other technologies. We had a tour of the library. It was just a fantastic time there. It was professional and very welcoming. I've included a link here. It's a fantastic VR tour of their library that's worth having a look at. The library, the Indigenous collections that are in that library are quite amazing. Up here, that feature in the ceiling, that's all Indigenous spears. They're supported at the ceiling there. It's just quite amazing. So moving on. Day 2 and 3 went to Monash University. Melbourne University, I should say. And this is an Arts West building. This is where the conference was held. And also in the Value Library next door, where the poster exhibition was displayed. So just included a couple of notes here. The Digital Curators Centre, they have made a couple of very broad statements here, and this is like convey key curation messages for primary stakeholders and to our wider community. So they're very, very general, and it's not surprising that when I attended the conference, there was people from all professions, including archivists, so I'll get to that shortly. So the program for the conference, it's the first time this conference has been held in the Southern Hemisphere, and they did have a 4-day workshop, and the last day was the conference, which I didn't attend, but we attended 2 days of lightning talks and papers. Here are the themes. I've just mentioned a number of themes here to give you an idea of the broad range of topics that were spoken of. So security, trust, big data, metadata. There were vendors there also. So moving on. So there's librarians, archivists, journalists, data specialists, scientists, and health professionals, linguists, archaeologists. So it's just amazing what was available there and the scope. And then we had people from professors presenting right through to new graduates and people who are presenting postgraduate papers, keynote speakers. Christine Keneally is an author, and she's written a couple of books, BuzzFeed author, and she spoke about orphanages, the data that surrounds orphanages both in Australia and the United States, and going back in history and how a lot of those orphans have now, in their mature years, have been separated from the data that they don't have, and how to fill the gap and where data curation can help that. And Christine Keneally, being a journalist, it's very interesting hearing her take and how data curation can fill the gaps and how they can inform what's in there. And the closing keynote speaker from the National Library of Medicine, she wasn't able to attend as such, but because the US closed down government, but she was beamed into the screen, and it was very interesting talk. And she talked about their saving medical models. The scientists' medical models are being saved now as well. It's quite amazing. Moving on. Some highlighted papers that I have shown here. The top one, I'll come back to that one shortly. This shows the interest that I have in data visualization. It's a collaboration between academics, an academic and UX designers, and putting together a map. Melbourne, I'll come back to that. And there's my colleagues' talk there. And there's a keynote speaker. There's information there on keynote speaker. And the winning poster, there was 26 posters, or I should say 24 posters. And this is the poster I presented. We had a minute madness poster presentations. So we were all given a number. We'd come up to the podium and we'd make our deliberation, and we were timed out with a squeaky duck. So I just had one squeak and off the stage, but a few needed to take a few squeaks before they exited the stage. It was a terrific experience in presenting the poster. This was essentially what I got out in about a minute, very briefly. So looking at takeaways for our employer. Attending the conference affords an opportunity to share ideas and knowledge with QUT staff and colleagues, and network with other curation professionals. Can continue to grow QUT Digital Collections, and we reported back to our section here and Library Resource Services. I was able to create a report for looking at the video repository, which was sent to a information architect who's looking at prospects of future software in that space. There was a request that we would bring back or be able to present the information from the conference about research papers that were there to our research report staff here at QUT, because we've just taken on Elsevier Pure at the end of last year. There's particular interest there. Off the Grid has been a terrific launch pad for this whole endeavour, and I've had several conversations with other staff who've looking to advance themselves in the library, and Off the Grid is a very good starting place if you're professional. If you have skills and abilities, and if you want to develop ideas and skills, and it's not within your general workplace job description, it's a good place to start. And as I've found also, we can take it one step further and move it into the conference space. And I strongly believe that data digital visualization can enhance client engagement, supports QUT library goals. Some takeaways for QULOC, I'm thinking, well, it's this webinar and a future detailed report. And the realisation that scholarships are for all library staff. And some takeaways for myself, my professional development. Presenting a poster at the conference was a valuable experience, which enabled me to give focus, account, and receive feedback on my ideas going forward. So I was able to attain my goal to further develop UX interface design, knowledge, data visualization skills. And particularly interested was a project there called Circuit Project, which I'll show you shortly. I'm always looking for contexts in which I can frame my projects, that I can develop new skills into the future through off the grid, and experience an interstate site visit to Monash University to meet colleagues, to interview and discuss video curation practices and generate report is a useful skill. So this is the circuit that I was talking about before. So that's using the same sort of programming I use for what I presented on the poster, so I found that very useful. So with the poster was also a prototype which I'm developing. There was a QR code at the bottom of the poster which would deliver to an on-site work example of this. So this is just a placeholder here. There is a link here to the prototype as it stands. It's a work in progress. And there's some tips. I just think presenting a poster is an excellent way to network and practice the skill of presentation, perhaps leading to presenting a paper. Poster presentation is only a minute long, and you're able to condense your idea into a minute, sharpens your focus. I'm always looking for context in which to frame my ideas, and you cannot attend all sessions in a conference. So the fact that this particular conference had had most of the papers available at the conference website is terrific. And going over that material at a later date, I was able to find even more useful material. And this image here is from Monash University, just in their grounds there. I thought it was interesting. So this is at the end. Well, thank you again, QULOC, for this opportunity. And I would definitely recommend taking advantage of the QULOC professional development scholarships. So that concludes the talk for now. Thank you.
Greg, thank you very much. And wow, what a diverse conference that was. Certainly a wide range of participants and also speakers. I'm going to ask our attendees today if they had any questions for Greg. Just checking our platforms here, and I'm going to ask Adam if he can also have a check, and just in case I haven't missed anything. So, Greg, we don't have any questions for you specifically, but as we just have a few minutes left, Adam, I'd like to open up to our speakers today. So if we could have Stacey and Julie back, I'll just ask one question of all of our speakers today. I'm going to put them on the spot. And I'd just like to run through with you a question just about, I know that Greg put up some tips about sort of applying, but it would be great if you could give any of your tips about how your experience about applying for a QULOC professional development scholarship went, you know, filling out the forms, and then perhaps just a little comment about the report back if you've done that already. So I'm going to put Greg on the spot first. Any comments or tips that you might have for other QULOC staff? And I think your comments that the PD scholarships are open to all staff is a really important one.
Yes. So the application of putting in the application for the QULOC scholarship was quite straightforward, and I was able to get some assistance from other staff who have already gone down that track before, and taking an idea and then moving it into that space was very easy for me, much simpler than I expected. So I would encourage any staff to do that. So for me, it was the taking the off the grid, and I don't know how many other universities have anything similar to that, but I thought it was a terrific way to be able to showcase ideas, my skills that weren't being used in the workplace. So yeah, I think that's probably the point. Yeah.
Thanks, Greg. We might move to Stacey next.
Sure. So I went to the QULOC PD Scholarship webpage and had a look at all of the information that was on there and looked at the exemplar report. And so when I filled out the application, I actually sent it to Claire Thorpe, who is our Associate Director, Library and Experience, and she oversees all of our professional development applications. So she gave me feedback on my application and then sent it in. And yeah, was there another part of that question that I missed?
Reporting back, how did you
Reporting back. So I'm still working on my reports for the report back, just because I'm still assembling some of my PD activities that I'm doing. So I've been tweeting and blogging. So yeah, it's very straightforward. There's the template there to fill out. And again, I looked at Maureen's exemplar report just for some inspiration. So
great, good tips. Julie, anything from you?
Oh yeah, basically the same as Stacey, going onto the QULOC website and looking at the exemplars there. It's not an onerous task at all. It's quite an easy process to go through. And I've actually sent my report in already. It's just is that the one with the paragraph per application in my work, applications in my library? I think I sent that one back already. I thought I'd get that out of the way first and then start working on my presentation. But yeah, it was a great process, and I would encourage everybody to go onto the QULOC website and have a go.
Well, I think that's a good way to end today's webinar. So I'd really like to thank our speakers today, Stacey, Julie and Greg. Thank you for all of your experiences and sharing those, and I think you've given lots of other QULOC staff the inspiration to start putting in their applications. So the next round of the PD scholarships for QULOC, the information will go out in May 2019, so keep a lookout for those. We'll have future PD scholarship webinars throughout the year, so please do keep a lookout for them. And remember that you can look at all of the previous webinars on the QULOC website links from there as well.
So there's a question that just came up too.
No worries, I'll have a look at that. So just in terms of the scholarship, how it works in terms of the funding. Funding is through QULOC centrally, and it's negotiated with each library. So what happens is the applications come through to the University Librarians Committee. A small group of the ULs decide on the scholarship, and then the Executive Officer of QULOC works with the University Librarian of the winning scholarship to work out the funding requirements. So that's basically how the funding works. So the other good thing to do is, if you had any questions about funding specifically, you've either got your workplace and organisational development committee members that you can ask, and I also wanted to give a shout out to those committee members who are within your libraries that you can ask any question about the PD scholarships to them in the first instance, and of course your university librarian, but also our QULOC executive officer. So you can email Adam anytime with your questions as well. Hopefully that's answered that question. Any other final questions or comments? If not, everyone have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.